was my okay, sorry about that. Yeah, you can also push the button on your microphone too to make it to make it more obvious. I'm sorry about that. Okay. All right. So whatever value gets put in the arg placeholder menu, in this case the characters, menu 1A, the string, again, it's enclosed in quotes because that's a name I made up. I want that exact value to be sent. It's not some variable or something else. I'm going to plug that into here, and anywhere I refer to that, it's going to use whatever value I passed it to. So wherever, when I call the argument, this gets put into this variable. It's a variable because it can be different each time. All right, you give the value when you call it, and then that's going to be used here to show that. Now I could have a function with 2 arguments. Then when I call it, I need to supply 2 arguments. All right. And the sequence of it, it just is the first value goes in the first argument, the second value goes in the second argument. All right? Or however many arguments that you have. So now this should work. And it should be generalized, and it should be easy to maintain. So I hit refresh. And as we mouse over, it changes to the one that I want to see. And when I mouse out, it doesn't do anything. All right? Which is how we wanted this to work. Questions about this? Now, let's imagine we wanted to go and change this. Let's imagine we added a 4th menu. All right? We're really only going to have to do a little bit of work here. All right? If I added a 4th menu, what would I have to do? Well, I'd have to add the menu. Well, that makes sense, right? Yep. So I'd make this menu 1D. I put this up there. All right. So of course I'd have to do that. I have to add the HTML. I have to add the content. And then the only thing else I have to do is go and change this to also hide this. And you're right. Oh, I did change it to have a D. All right. And now it works for all of them. Compare that to what we would have had to do before to add the 4th one. We would have had to go in and we'd have to duplicate that. I'd have to add that 4th menu to every on mouse over event and so on. All right. So again, we made it a lot more maintainable. Now, this is not as I mentioned before, this is not a class in JavaScript. So we do not, we're just exploring the capabilities of JavaScript. The goal is not to make you an expert in JavaScript. We could actually do even better in this function. And we could actually write code that found every submenu and looped through it. All right? And we could do that based on the class. We could find everything, just like there's a document get element by ID, there's a document get elements by class. And that would give us an array of elements, all right, a list of elements, and then we could loop through all of them. So we could make this code even a little bit better by doing that, by grabbing those, looping through, and all that. And any of you that have done programming before, you take a shot at that. It's really not that particularly hard to do, but it's more than I want to take on in this sort of short introduction to JavaScript. That would make this code better still. By what criteria do I say it's better still? By the criteria of there's less I'd have to do to add a new tab. That is, it's easier to maintain. So to add a new submenu, all I would have to do is add the HTML, and I would not have to make any changes to the JavaScript. It's funny sometimes because I'll get students, I'll tell students it would be better to do it this way or better to do it that way. Or other times I'll tell students, well, yeah, it's about the same if you do it this way or that way. All right? Programming is not like art where it's all subjective. All right? Where you look at one painting or another painting and you say you think this one's better and this one isn't as good. Well, you can kind of argue that, but really it comes down to a person's interpretation and all that. With code, there is very definitely some distinct criteria that you can use in determining if one piece of code is better than another. All right? First of all, the code better work in all cases, right? That's like the starting point. But that isn't the only criteria. And the biggest criteria is how maintainable it can be. All right? So the less you have to change to get this to work, when something else changes, the better code it is. So this code that I have now, I can objectively say is better than the code that we had coming in the class today. It's not a matter of opinion. It's not because I did this and someone else did the one earlier today, which isn't true. I did both of them, but you get the idea. It isn't just that I prefer my way of doing things. I can objectively say this code is better than that. You can oftentimes improve code that works. That process is called refactoring. All right? Essentially, what I did today was an exercise in refactoring. I took code that worked, I looked at it, and I said, well, it worked, but we can do a better job, and we improved it. Now, we could still do a better job with this by putting in the get elements by class and looping through it, but I'm choosing not to do that for today. All right? And in the real world, you have decisions like that all the time. All right? In other words, you could work on code over and over and over again and make it better and find slight ways to improve it and all that. At some point, you can look and say, that's good enough. All right? I don't really need to make it any better. Okay, I could make this where I wouldn't have to change the JavaScript if I added another menu, but it's really not that big a deal to copy and paste one line and change it. All right? So that's a judgment call. All right? And depending on all sorts of things, your time and budget constraints and so on, you would make the decision to either go ahead and improve it or not to improve it. All right? The point is writing code ought to be the way. I hesitate to say this because I'm going to get some people say that's not how I write essays in English class. All right? But writing code ought to be the way that your English professor tells you to write a term paper or to write an essay, right? You ought to plan it out first. Give some thought about what you're going to do first. Don't just jump in. Now, this isn't, again, this isn't a heavy programming class, so we're just going to talk about that a little bit, all right? But with your JavaScript, you plan it. One of the keys in writing an essay or a term paper is revising. You write it once, and you look at it, put it aside for a while, come back to it, have someone else read it, and so on, and then make improvements to it. That processing and coding is called refactoring. In some cases, you actually have code reviews where people sit down. You know, it's a good sort of quality control thing that you can do, all right? Whereas someone else sits down and looks at the code that you've written and supplies you with feedback of it. All right? Questions about this? All right, this is a case where we took one idea, the fact that we can change the display value of an element, and change it by pointing to it and changing it. And we changed, in both of our examples so far, we did the same thing. All right? We triggered it based on different events, and we did a little bit more in this example, but in both of these examples, all we're doing is we're changing the display property of the style of something on our page. So we changed, in essence, a piece of the CSS. We initialize every submenu to show none, or to have a display value of none, and we dynamically change some of them to have a display of block based on some user action. It's not just CSS elements that we can change. All right? We can also change HTML elements. All right? For example, we could change images, all right, on a page. All right? Let's go and do something with images and change the value of images. I'm going to go out and grab some images. I don't think we're going to be doing that today. No. You forget that I am a parent, and the ability to tune out background noise is a key characteristic. That was funny. I'll give you that one. All right. Let's say I have another common thing. We'll start this off. We'll see how far we get. Another very common thing is to have thumbnails and the bigger version of the picture. All right. So we're going to make a little photo gallery over the next day or so. So I don't know how far we'll get with this. First of all, thumbnails. Thumbnails are a smaller version of the picture, but keep in mind that an effective thumbnail does not merely need to be a smaller version of the picture. You can actually do some clever things, and by cropping the picture, making it to be a smaller version that isn't simply a smaller version, but a smaller version maybe of a section of the picture. You can actually do some pretty clever things with that. I also am a big fan of making sure all my thumbnails are the same ratio. All right. So, for example, a lot of times I'll make sure all my thumbnails are square, even though the pictures themselves might be rectangular. Pardon me? Okay. So we have I have 3 images here. 3 images of baby birds that were here on campus. They're actually by the vice president, or not by, what is she now? What is her title? Provost, I think, whatever that means. It's right by her office. There was a nest. Actually, every year, I can say 2 out of the past 3 years. I wasn't here last spring, so I don't know if they were there last spring or not. And I have not yet seen them this spring. But there's a nest over there, the bridge that goes over to the College Center. And here they are. Aww. So I got 3 photos of them. So what I'm going to do, first of all, remember, before we start playing around with these pictures at all, we're going to make a backup of them. All right? And we do that because if I manipulate the image and somehow make it smaller or whatever, then decide I want a bigger version, you can't take an image that you've made smaller and make it bigger without getting some distortion. So I'm stuffing away a version of this. I'm going to go and rename these 1, 2, and 3, cleverly enough. And then I'm going to make thumbnails for each of them. And in the interest of time, I'm simply going to resize the thumbnail to be 33%, and I'm going to go and save this as 1T. Ooh, you're on the ball today. We'll go and we'll edit this guy. Now, my first pass, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this without paying too much attention of the CSS. Because really the main thing I want to focus on is the JavaScript for this. But you could also, by putting in CSS, you could get it to, kind of look the way that you want it to, and so on. All right, so I have 3 pictures and their corresponding thumbnails. All right. Get rid of all this. And I'm going to put do I just have a navigation tag in one of those? I'm going to make an unordered list of my thumbnails. All right. Then underneath that, I'm going to show one of their images, the big image. All right. So we have that. All right. Now, for now, we're not going to worry about the fact that these are up here and that's down there, because that's a CSS thing. That's what I want. That's my HTML. I have a list of thumbnails, followed by I have a big picture. If I don't like the way that it's laid out, well, so what? I can go back and change that via CSS. Now, I'll try to get one of these done, and then we'll expand on this on Tuesday. How am I going to change? Let's say I want to change it so that when I put my mouse over this one, the big image changes to the second one. Hover. And what is the JavaScript event for hover? On mouse over. So let's put it on 2, and we'll just do 2, and we'll finish this later. On mouse over equals. Now, in the spirit of refactoring, we're not necessarily going to go for the perfect solution right off the bat. We're going to get it working. When we're done, we can step back and say, hey, maybe how we can improve this. So what do I want to do? When I hover over this thumbnail, what do I want to do? I want to change the Src property of this image. So what do I have to do first? I have to point to that image. All right? So to point to a particular element on the page, that element needs an ID. So ID equals big pic. On mouse over, then I'm going to say document get element by ID big pic. So that points to that thing on the page. Now finish the statement. What do I need to put in there? It's not an aspect of the style, right? The Src attribute is part of the HTML. And you're absolutely right. I point to this thing. What do I want to change? Well, I want to change the Src attribute. If I was changing this by hand, what would I do? I'd change the Src attribute. So I'll change the Src attribute to be equal to 2.jpg. All right. I go and save this. Put my mouse over that, and it changes. Now, none of the other ones work, of course, because I haven't coded it. But again, what I wanted to do with this example, and we'll finish this up on Tuesday, is show you that the formula is sort of the same. In one case, I was changing the aspect of the style. In another case, I'm changing a property of the HTML. The process, though, is the same. You point to the thing on the page. You then say what about it you want to change, and then you set the value to it. Now, again, it can get a lot more involved with that, right? We could have all sorts of different conditions and loops and stuff like that. But the basic formula of pointing to an element on the page and then changing one of its properties or one of its style properties remains the same. All right. We'll see you up in lab.